Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking a really fascinating and honestly deeply unsettling question by looking at the two ultimate prophets of our dark future, George Orwell and Aldous Huxley. Decades ago, these two literary heavyweights offered up completely opposing blueprints for how a society could be controlled. But as we look around today, well, the lines between their dystopian fictions and our modern reality are getting incredibly blurry. Okay, let's dive into this. For generations now, cultural observers and readers have debated this exact question. Are we living in George Orwell's 1984 or Aldous Huxley's Brave New World? It's kind of funny. Whenever a crazy new facial recognition technology drops, people immediately shout Orwell. But then when we see a subway car packed full of people just endlessly scrolling on their smartphones, completely numb to the physical world around them, people shout Huxley. So which is it? To really ground us, we should consider a brilliant juxtaposition from the cultural critic Neil Postman. He pointed out that Orwell basically feared a brutalist grip of state power, right? Those who would deprive us of information, conceal the truth, and control us by inflicting pain. But Huxley? Huxley feared a sterilized, artificially joyful society. He feared that the truth would just be drowned out in a sea of total irrelevance, and that people would actually be controlled by inflicting pleasure. It's essentially a captive culture versus a trivial culture. Let's start with Act 1, the Orwellian reality, fear and surveillance. Think about Orwell for a second. He wrote his novel right in the aftermath of World War II, watching dictators use relentless propaganda and censorship to maintain power. He imagined a future where every single thought and action could be monitored. In Oceania, citizens live under the constant, unblinking gaze of the telescreen. As Orwell wrote, the telescreen received and transmitted simultaneously. Every sound overheard, every movement scrutinized. Sounds a bit familiar, right? Today, the government doesn't even need to install telescreens in our homes. We voluntarily buy them. We carry them in our pockets and literally sleep with them next to our pillows. The modern smartphone constantly follows us, physically tracking our movements, our search histories, and our daily habits. And this brilliantly illustrates just how far things have gone. When we look at the rise of global AI surveillance, we see a supercharged chilling effect on personal freedom. The sources show us that China currently utilizes roughly 600 million CCTV cameras, heavily powered by real-time facial recognition and integrated directly into social credit systems. But hey, it's not just happening there. Across the globe, AI and tech giants are consolidating data at an unprecedented scale. Through digital tracking tools, location check-ins, and QR codes, they're mining our digital footprints to predict and monitor human behavior. It's a level of surveillance that literally makes Orwell's thought police look kind of archaic. But beyond surveillance, Orwell also warned us about newspeak. The entire goal of newspeak was to shrink the dictionary down so much that thought crime literally becomes impossible. Why? Because the words to even express dissenting ideas simply wouldn't exist anymore. It enforces groupthink by completely narrowing our intellectual range. And neutrally speaking, if you look at today, we see an excessive use of modern newspeak by political leaders and state-controlled media alike. Heavily loaded political labels are aggressively thrown around to shut down debate, simplify really complex issues into binary camps, and systematically limit our freedom of expression. Now, politically, Orwell's world is dominated by ENG, which is absolute single-party rule where absolutely no other perspective is tolerated. Looking at our sources, analysts draw a really striking impartial parallel to modern democratic systems. They argue that we frequently see a dynamic where only one dominant party, or maybe a very narrow coalition of acceptable parties, is deemed legitimate or Republican, and anyone stepping outside of this pre-approved, highly managed political consensus, they are immediately alienated and cast right out of the acceptable public square. And then, of course, there's the Ministry of Truth. In 1984, the past is constantly scraped clean and completely rewritten to match whatever the government's current narrative happens to be. It's perfectly captured by that famous slogan, "Who controls the past controls the future, who controls the present controls the past." Fast forward to today, and we're living in an era of pervasive censorship, disinformation, and fake news, where official narratives are just constantly realigned, digital records are quietly updated behind the scenes, and inconvenient truths are easily buried by search algorithms. All right, let's pivot completely now. Act 2, the Huxleyan reality, desire and distraction. You see, Aldous Huxley warned of a far subtler dystopia, one that doesn't really need to force you into submission because, well, you're simply too comfortable, too entertained, and too distracted to care about your own subjugation. He recognized that humans just have this almost infinite appetite for distraction. In Brave New World, the state hands out soma, which is this daily chemical escape from any minor stressor. Today, we don't necessarily need a government-issued pill, do we? We have endless scrolling, highly personalized social media algorithms, and digital dopamine loops. These tools sedate us voluntarily, optimizing our environments for instant gratification while systematically uninstalling our capacity for critical thought. Now, what's really interesting here is how Huxley viewed the fundamental core of human connection: procreation. In his book, babies aren't born naturally. They're manufactured in hatcheries, literally grown in bottles on assembly lines. The whole family unit is entirely obsolete. Now, fast forward to our current era. Biotech companies are actively developing exogeneses. These are artificial wombs capable of growing fetuses outside the human body. Combine that with the explosive rise of synthetic AI companions and robotic relationships, and Huxley's vision of simulated connection, totally devoid of genuine, messy human emotion, feels incredibly prophetic today. Let's contrast how these two dystopian worlds handle dissent. In Orwell's 1984, dissidents faced brutal physical torture in the Ministry of Love. Books were literally burned in what he called memory holes. Individuals who challenged the state were vaporized, completely erased from all historical records and photographs as if they had literally never existed. It was a violent, brutal, and very physical suppression of political dissent. Huxley, however, imagined something totally different. In Brave New World, the misfit Bernard Marx isn't tortured or executed. He is simply exiled to an island, alienated from the mindless bliss of the collective. When we look at modern cancel culture and algorithmic shadow banning impartially, we see a system that actually serves the exact same purpose as those dictatorial book burnings, but it's using Huxley's method. You aren't physically harmed, but if you step outside the acceptable digital worldview, your reach is throttled, your accounts are demonetized, and you are cast into digital exile. The algorithm simply makes sure no one hears you. So, what does this all mean? The ultimate question we have to ask ourselves is this: are we controlled by what we fear, or are we controlled by what we desire? Are we being crushed by a boot, or are we just amusing ourselves to death? Let's move to and see how this all builds together in Act 3, the hybrid convergence, the modern dystopia. The real truth revealed in our sources is that we don't actually have to choose between Orwell and Huxley. The crazy twist is that we are experiencing both. Tech giants and state apparatuses have perfectly merged Orwellian surveillance capitalism with Huxleyan sensory distraction. Think about it. They use the Orwellian mechanisms, smartphones tracking our every move, AI gathering immense amounts of our personal data to fuel the Huxleyan result. All that deeply private data is used to feed us highly personalized algorithmic dopamine loops that keep us passive, distracted, and endlessly entertained. We are watched, just like Winston Smith, so that we can be pacified like a citizen of the world state. To put that into perspective, look at this number right here. 8. That is the average number of hours people are spending staring at screens daily. That's literally more time than we spend sleeping. It's a staggering metric, and it really proves the true horror of our modern dystopia. It doesn't require oppressive, violent force because it thrives on our own consent. Our intellectual passivity and our willingness to be constantly tracked is something we are voluntarily opting into every single day. Which leaves us with this final, really provocative thought. Every single time we download a new app, accept a new terms of service, or blindly scroll past our real lives, have we willingly ticked the I agree button on our own subjugation? Convenience and entertainment are incredibly powerful drugs, for sure. But we really have to ask ourselves, is the comfort of a frictionless, algorithmic life worth the cost of our independent thought and our freedom? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and honestly, I hope this leaves you looking at your screen just a little bit differently today.